Hello and welcome to week 6 of ED 521, Educational Research and Applications. I want you guys to know I was looking at your feedback, how to improve the course. I don't have any samples of a lit review other than my dissertation that I can share with you, but I am going to break it down later. Long story short, you guys have all done this type of work before in this program, in that the teachers have given you a topic and you've gone and done the research. This time you're choosing the topic, but it's very similar to all those papers you've written before. And from what I've seen from all of you, you can all do it. First of all, please reach out if you have questions. I gave feedback specifically on remarks to my initial remarks. I know some people are really concerned about their question. Shoot me an email and we'll go back and forth. If we need to set up a time to meet, we can do that. Excuse me. The focus for this week is to have a literature review draft. If you email it to me this week, I will try to review and provide you feedback. The earlier the better. I'm going to do them in the order I get them. Even if that is just your rough outline and you just want feedback, does this seem like I'm going in the right direction? That is fine. I will respond. I promise. Just a reminder, the review is due at the end of week 7. So that is not this week, but next week, Saturday at midnight. If you need an extension, you could go all the way out to Wednesday of week 8 if you have a good reason. Some of you have been in contact with me and have very good reasons. Your activities and readings for week 6 are Lambert's chapters 11, 12, and 13. Continuing to look at for EPA resources around your question if you have not found enough of them already. Responding to the opening remarks, and 1 discussion board post. So please share 1 word to describe how you feel now that you have completed almost this research writing course. Describe a connection you can see between learning outcomes of this course and your classroom, teacher, professional, educator life. In your opinion, what is the most important thing you learned about yourself in this class? Please be prepared to provide an example of how you demonstrate an understanding of various research design, understand the application of various designs for use in educational research, demonstrate problem-solving skills leading to confidence in making decisions to engage in educational research, and develop a framework for understanding and applying research to professional practice in the field of education. I would say, based on what I've read from you guys, number 3, this confidence part is what most of you are building the most of. And know that when doing research, there is no such thing as a bad question. You could be super broad, you could be super skinny. That doesn't make it bad. It's just trying to find the sweet spot where it's going to end up being doable for you in the amount of time you need, and you're going to have enough information. I don't think I've had to tell anybody to broaden their topic. That can happen where you are so specific that you're not going to be able to find research that is closely related. Generally, the issue is it's so broad that you're going to struggle to narrow it down. That doesn't mean that you can't do that question. It just means that there's going to be a ton of research and you might feel overwhelmed if that's what you're searching. So some people asked to see going onto the library and doing a search. I tried this morning, I couldn't get logged in, but the number 1 thing that I recommend is to use Boolean phrases. So, we're going to put in parentheses here. I'm going to do later an example of Lord of the Rings in philosophy. So I would say Lord of the Rings, and then in parentheses again, philosophy. And I might say, not C.S. Lewis. Took a class on Lord of the Rings in college, so I remember that J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis are often compared in the philosophy in their books. But I don't want to deal with that in my research, so I'm going to say and philosophy, but not C.S. Lewis. By doing those ands or not things like that around words in parentheses, you should be able to narrow them down more. Versus if I didn't have the parentheses, the reader, the tech for the database is just going to be looking for something that has Lord of the Rings and philosophy that's not C.S. Lewis, rather than looking for Lord of the Rings and philosophy, but excluding results that include C.S. Lewis. So it's important to include parentheses so it knows it's looking for specifically this and not this whole string of words. Hope that's helpful. If it's not and it's something you already know, well, then you're ahead of the game, because the adding knots was something that I learned late in my doctoral. So I was reading a lot of articles I didn't have to. Just a reminder, on your lit review, you are only looking for 5 scholarly peer-reviewed research studies. You can do more. Make sure you include a source citation, include how each study is related to the research question, including the following insights gained from reading the study: number of participants, background, demographics of participants, study, time frame, and findings of the study, and any limitations that were mentioned, including an APA covers and reference page. I will break that down a little bit here in a minute. I'm going to go down to my example. All right, brief example here. 2 ways to do a lit review. I very much prefer the one on the left to the one on the right. The one on the right, I'm going to say my topic is philosophy and Lord of the Rings. And I have 5 articles about it, so I have 5 paragraphs, and each paragraph is about an article. This is an acceptable way to do it. I don't think it reads well, and I think it's going to make it harder for you to build off of. But you would say, like, article 1 by such and such author, they surveyed 50 British literature experts. Some limitations: they didn't survey people outside of Britain, and they gave them a survey. So it was a mixed methods because they both had Likert scale questions and open responses. Moving on to article 2, blah, 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 blah. Article 3, blah, 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 blah. So you can do that. That makes, I think that is harder to read, and it is also harder to build off of later. What I prefer is if I said, okay, so I'm going to talk about philosophy and Lord of the Rings. The first thing I want to talk about is connections to the countries and ideologies in World War II. So I've kind of built that out, and I'll say, well, this article surveyed 50 British Lord of the Rings experts, including some who had lived with or worked with J.R. Tolkien or his descendants, J.R.R. Tolkien. And then this is what they found. Some limitations are they didn't talk to people outside of Britain. Next, in these, and then probably article 4 also delved into this, and they found some other connections. This next one, article 2, talked about a lot about the connections between J.R. Martin and C.S. Lewis and how Christianity came out in their books. Blah, 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 blah. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Article 5 also mentioned this. It was also mentioned in Article 1. And then lastly, Article 4 was written by, say, Christopher Tolkien, his son or grandson, I can't remember. And he adamantly, using firsthand knowledge of the author and the author's letters, claims that J.R. Tolkien did not want any of this philosophy or allegorical reasoning to be connected to his books, and he wrote them out of, a passion for writing and telling these type of stories, not because he wanted people to draw more meanings out of it. Now, doing it in that way, I've done the same thing where I've broken down all 5 articles, but it's grouped by subject. That's what I would prefer you guys to do. I know this isn't a super academic example, but I do have a book on this, and it's a good read. So it's a written narrative that examines, summarizes, and synthesizes. This is the left one. It's philosophy with 3 topics or more. You could have more or less. Whereas a annotated bibliography or a separate list of studies, it's doable. That's the right example, but it usually doesn't read very well. And I would almost say doing this is a precursor to then building out something like this, which you guys have all written papers that you broke 5-paragraph essays where you had an introduction, said, this is my thesis, here are the 3 main ideas, and here's a conclusion. This is the same thing on a bigger scale. Jumping all around it, I'm sorry. So the purpose of the lit review is to develop a clear response and answer to your research question. You chose what it is. So you want to be able to say, at the end in your conclusion, this is what I found, summarizing everything, summarizing each of your topics, depending on how many sub-themes you have. Make sure you begin with that introduction. And in that introduction, make sure you very clearly state the question for your research. So the research question being analyzed is blah, 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 or the question to be considered in the study is blah, 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 blah. Make sure you very clearly state it so that the readers know what you're talking about. That can even be your title for the paper, is just your question. Summarize and synthesize your sources. It's helpful to have headings within your literature review and have them be your themes. So if I was writing the philosophy in Lord of the Rings, I would have headings of World War II, Christianity, and nothing / coincidence. I would, use a thesaurus and make that better. But those would be my 3 main headings from what I can remember from my undergrad years. Or another example, if we're going actual academic: vocabulary acquisition and reading fluency. Maybe some sub-themes under a research question of how do SEL, trauma-informed practices, impact reading skills and reading skill attainment in kindergartners. Well, some sub-themes might be vocabulary acquisition and reading fluency. And make sure you end your paper with a conclusion. Wrap it all up in a nice package. What is the answer you found? If you didn't find an answer, why do you think that is? What further research should be done? Make sure you're looking back at the syllabus for things to hit on, because you do want to hit on future research ideas, what you found in your, you may find that it's very inconclusive, or you may find that the research is showing that this isn't an effective practice. That's okay. My dissertation ended up with a non-statistically significant answer. That doesn't mean that I didn't find anything. It meant that I found that I needed more participants to actually be able to statistically say there's a difference. Reminder that the quickest way to reach me is through email. I will be traveling a little bit for work this week, so I may be more difficult to reach. Specifically Wednesday, I'm driving up to Moose Lake to visit the prison up there. So I'll be in my car for like 4.5, 5 hours. So I might not be responding to email during that time. But the response to initial remarks for this week is, where do you start when writing a research paper? And I want you to think of 2 scenarios. Either you have a great question in mind, or you don't have a question figured out yet. So how are those 2 scenarios different? If you already have your question, where do you start? And if you don't really have a question yet, where do you start? Take this back to previous classes where you had papers with a prompt. This is way more open-ended when it's a research paper that you get to choose a topic for. Make sure you look at each other, because everybody's going to have different answers on how they started. For instance, if I were answering this question, looking back at my dissertation, I knew the question I wanted to answer. Well, try to answer, because I found statistically insignificant results for like 4 or 5 years. But when I actually started writing the paper, I knew the question, and now I needed to figure out how could I answer that question. So when I started, it was building out my literature review and the background knowledge of what happens in correctional education. Why is it important? What are the different possible things that students can do to receive a high school equivalency or a high school credential. Okay, I have my background knowledge. Now let's get into the actual specifics of the question I want to ask. So when I start writing a research paper, that's going to be a longer one, I build out the foundational knowledge into the paper and kind of work my way from really broad down to very specific. That's my method. That doesn't mean it's your method, and definitely doesn't mean it's the right method. Sorry, I got a little long-winded here. A reminder, we will have a live Q&A Wednesday 7th, starting at 7:30 p.m. Central Time. I will send out the Zoom link via an announcement that day. I plan on at least until 8. If lots of people are online and asking good questions, I can extend as long as we need to. If nobody's online, I will be logging off at 8. So I look forward to seeing as many of you there as can be. I will record this again so that you can view it later, and I will try to post it Wednesday night or Thursday morning. Have a great week. Keep working on those lit reviews. I'm very, very excited to start seeing them come in.